Now we begin in South Africa, where BRICS ministers are meeting to discuss trade, protectionism, as well as tariffs. U.S. tariffs are a major concern for the BRICS group, given the adverse effect that they'll have on developing economies. Well, CGTN's Angelo Coppola has more on that story.
The 5 trade ministers were unanimous about their rejection of the increase in unilateralism being displayed by the United States of America, because its economic impact has been immediate.
The rise of protectionism and unilateralism leads to uncertainties and is already translated into the fall of 23% in global foreign direct investments and in the stagnation of global value chains, as recently pointed out by UNCTAD. The WTO announced yesterday that new trade restrictive measures from G20 economies have doubled in 2018.
The China head of delegation didn't mince his words when talking about the move to increased unilateralism and protectionism. While the global economy is on a stable and upward trajectory, economic growth remains lackluster, and this was heightened by a rising inward-looking tendency that has led to more friction, he said.
And some countries have a rising inward-looking tendency, adopts unilateralism, which has led to the escalation in the global trade frictions. It is fair to say that BRICS countries and the world economic growth are now faced with severe challenges. With the protectionism and unilateralism, the world's largest economy is like a bull in a china shop.
Multilateralism and closer cooperation between the BRICS member countries was the key theme during the open discussions that were held this morning. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Magaliesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's discuss that meeting today further. We're joined by Lumkile Mondi from Wits University School of Economics and Business Sciences. You're very welcome to the show, sir. Now, last year's meeting saw ministers reach a consensus on various issues, cooperation in specific areas such as intellectual property rights, trade and services, as well as investment facilitation. Now, what are your thoughts on the discussion at this year's meeting and certainly the progress made so far?
Good evening, Uche, and your listeners. I think we are very encouraged by the continuing cooperation among the BRIC countries plus, and more importantly also, given the unilateralism that was seen from the bull, the United States, and more importantly, of how the world, particularly the members of the BRIC countries plus, can find new ways of increasing their trade flows, and in particular, ensuring that Africa does really play its pivotal role, because when you look forward to 2050, we think that Africa will be one of the biggest economies, and if we can have that cooperation with the BRIC members, we'll be able to really move much faster and achieve the goals that we set ourselves as Africa.
Now, Mr. Mondi, do you believe that South Africa is an equal partner in BRICS right now in terms of real exports as well as fair trade between the other BRICS countries and South Africa?
Well, I mean, South Africa is, in terms of its GDP size, its population size, is far smaller compared to the other members. I think what South Africa brings to the table is really its dominance in the African continent. And therefore, some of the members saw it as a player that could help them access the rest of the African market. However, we know very, very, very well that South Africa, over the past 9 years, have lost a lot of momentum. And therefore, it's got to do a lot of work to gain credibility within the African continent. And we are very much encouraged by the Africa's initiative around the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which we think can complement what the BRICS Plus is trying to do by strengthening trade flows within the African continent, but also bringing foreign direct investment to African countries coming from the BRICS Plus countries.
Well, speaking about the Africa continent, we have seen a deeper dialogue between the BRICS countries and the rest of Africa, particularly through the BRICS Plus initiative. Now, this year, we'll certainly see more African countries participating in the BRICS summit. What are your expectations in terms of constructive moves to work with the continent?
I think, we still have got issues around the BRICS itself, particularly around its financial institution, the New Development Bank. We think the New Development Bank is not transparent and its investment flows have not yet benefited Africa, particularly one of the members, South Africa. So we're quite concerned that some of the members are not behaving differently from some of the colonialists in Africa, whether British, Portuguese, or French. So we'd like to see more transparency coming through its own institution. So I'm hoping that the other African countries that will be joining these proceedings in South Africa will really highlight the issues around transparency, but also as the members invest in Africa, they use African labor. We don't see Russians or Indian or Chinese workers being brought here to take away the jobs that's supposed to be flowing to African countries. So I'm expecting quite a lot of rigorous discussion coming up at the summit. And I'm hoping that the rest of African countries will play their role and push South Africa not to give in to some of those weaknesses that have come through by investment by Chinese, where they bring foreign labor into the African market with us not benefiting at all going forward.
Now, we have seen trade tensions globally intensifying recently. How do you see this impacting those talks at this year's summit and certainly the overall BRICS partnership as well?
Well, the BRICS summit, as you know, the BRICS partnership, as you know, is a moving amoeba. We don't know how it's going to shape eventually. Particularly the role of civil society, because we want to have civil society playing a bigger role in the BRICS as an institution. And in that regard, it requires us, as we build this partnership, to respect human rights, to have countries abiding by rule of law, but more importantly, to resist any temptation of using child labor. So these are some of the things that we want to see, because you know that some of the countries have got a very poor track record around human rights. So it's quite important that in as much as we would like to have an alternative, or at least an opportunity of not using only the Bretton Woods institution, but use the BRICS institutions which are emerging. We'd like to see that playing according to the transparency rules that many countries have fought for in the Bretton Woods institutions.
Well, many thanks, sir, for your insights. Of course, Lumkile Mondi joining us there from Wits University.